Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast where we bring guests to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. Our goal is to provide you with options for products, services, and knowledge that can help benefit you or your business. I'm Cher Downing, your host, and I want to introduce today's guest, Andrew Herkert, with TrueScribe's Squigl. Hi, Andrew. How are you today?
Hi there, Cher. Doing great. Thanks for having me. How about yourself?
I'm terrific. Thanks. And I'm very excited to have you on board here today because we're going to talk about Squigl, which is a really exciting product and really important in adding some visual stimulation, as I like to think of it, when we're doing things, but also, as you and I talk a lot about, looking at teaching and learning. But let's start off first in hearing a little bit about your kind of pathway to how you've gotten into this and your background, and then we'll start talking a little bit more about the product itself.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a big question to start with, Cher. So thank you for that. In terms of my background and really what got me into this, I have to confess, I have a master's as well as a bachelor's degree in the history of art. And so being an art historian academically and by trade, right? I worked in galleries. I did assistantships in research. I did an excavation for 2 years running in Croatia, right? Of all things. So that background led me to be an aspiring Indiana Jones, right? I thought the museum life could be for me and research and this and that. But what I was really studying and what I was really doing was getting into visual communication, right? That was the core. And to kind of just put a capstone or in the world of academia, my qualifying paper, right, for my master's degree was actually breaking down and analyzing the form factor of Aztec codices based upon the stroke of the artist. So I was able to identify certain patterns, certain form factor, certain colors, certain brushstroke elements used by Aztec artists to discredit stories that were told by the conquering Spaniards, right? Almost proving that the stories that the Aztecs were telling through the brushstrokes, right? Telling different stories than what the Spanish overlords, if you will, were pretending had happened, if you will, right? So a very interesting kind of foray into the world of business communications, if you think about it that way. And so that led me very quickly into the world of advertising agencies and business communications at large. Once I kind of entered the professional world out of academia. So that kind of gives you some foundation. TrueScribe, as you're aware, started in the early 2010, earlier part of that decade, right? 2010, 2011. And that's where I was business development manager for a number of years, went on to be vice president of sales. And eventually, as we scaled up and became the 200th fastest growing company in America in the year 2015, we also raised a little bit of venture capital, which I know you were very aware of as it was happening. We did that raise to found a software company based upon the principles that made TrueScribe successful. Sure. That is the product we know today as Squigl. So with that, obviously we could delve into many of those different wormholes, but I'll pass to you the floor again and kind of let you lead the way here.
So thank you for sharing your background on that, because I think for the listeners, one of the things we always try to really point out is the EdTech field is so fascinating, and the majority of us didn't come up in a purely tech area or a purely this is what I'm going to be, when I grow up kind of feel. All of us bring all of this rich background that it then comes into what I term a secondary level of merging learning and education and business and technology. That really is the secondary part. The primary part is all of us who drive these things because of where we come from. We're just taking that knowledge and we're repackaging it and offering it differently. When you talk about, understanding the behavioral analysis of how they were drawing and scripting and writing, which is a little CSI-like for those people who like to watch, forensic analysis. But, behavior clearly is learned, and it's also how we learn. So when we see things, they stimulate us. That's why one ad just really resonates with us and makes us just happy. And we see another ad and we think, boy, that's a terrible product. Why would I use it? All of these things tie together. And then the communication of how those things come together, how they're spoken to us. I always look at some of the bigger agencies that do the Super Bowl ads. And you think about some of those that come out that are just years later still resonating with us. I think of the Clydesdale ad from 9/11. And to this day, if they push it out, they never put commentary with it. For the anniversary, all they very quietly do is put that out, and everyone immediately is talking about it. And I remember the first time I saw it. And so there's a historical resonance that hits with that also. So I appreciate you sharing your background because all of that comes together so nicely, particularly with this product, Squigl. One of the things for our listeners, I've worked with TrueScribe for a number of years now, followed them, watched them. For those of you that are starting startups, this is really a company success story that you need to look at and you need to study because they went about it all the right way in terms of knowing their focus, knowing their goal, and hitting those targets. And always constantly, though, keeping one eye out to see what else was coming. What were the trends? What was the future? It was never enough just to finish one goal and say, hey, we made it. We're there. We're great. It was always, how do we add on and how do we create different resonance? But the biggest thing about the company that I love is it's always keeping people in mind. It's the end user and it's the people that work for them. So, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the philosophy of TrueScribe and as Squigl came on board, because I think that's something when people are out trying to get a startup going, these are the things that get lost in translation.
Oh, certainly. And in fact, there's so much talk and in the valley, right? Or now in the cloud that's kind of based in the valley, right? But all of that online chatter that follows the startup community, there's so much talk about product, which is totally right. Absolutely. We're here for product, no question. And there's so much talk about valuation, right? And funding. And look at this $10 million, $20, $30 million round of funding. Oh, and now this company's worth $1 billion. Oh, and now this one's got a $10 billion. Well, then there's talk about people, but that's kind of like a third rung in the ladder, right? It seems like that's sometimes even an afterthought. At the end of the day, though, my platform and something that I learned early on, and I'm thinking, in terms of my business career, from an advisor who was focused on mergers and acquisitions, but this was somebody I talked to before we were even doing $1 million in revenue, right? So very early on,
sure.
I learned from this individual that in any pitch deck, the number one qualifier is not the product and it's not the valuation or the total addressable market. It's the team. And I kept that close and I held on to that. And at every next initiative for corporate development, or as we would think about scaling up to our next stair step, as you stated, right? It's always about growth. For me, I would say that the most pivotal aha moment in building companies, building teams, launching products, all of it was that one interaction with that one advisor. Again, probably 8 or 9 or 10 years ago now. And it literally was that. What's the team like? Who's on your team, right? And so with that, I truly feel that if it weren't for the people, if it weren't for the incredible minds leading our product development team, if it weren't for the tenacity of our great salespeople especially during the coronavirus that we're in right now, but at all levels. I mean, if it weren't for our production team who can grow, our production team has grown during coronavirus, right? If it weren't for these amazing people and picking the right chemistry, there's no question, Cher, that we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. I'd be working for some other company. I'd be doing some other thing, sure. But from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a fast growth perspective, it doesn't matter what you're selling. It matters who you're selling it with.
Exactly. And that is so important for our listeners, because I think for many of them, it's very easy to just get so focused on the tasks and so focused on those end results. And there's a lot of voices in your head coming from external factors who are telling you, you need to hit this mark, you need to make this much money, you need to be getting investors, all of these things that you need to be doing. No one ever says to you, you need to be finding the right people. That's a rarity when you hear that. And so that's something to really take near and dear to heart. So talk a little bit about the team that is in both of the bigger entity and then also within software company, and kind of what you look for and what are some of the skill sets that are out there.
Yeah, that's a really solid point of departure here. I think the best way to envision our organization is really one company. Just like, and think about larger companies, right? How, let's use General Mills as an example, right? You could buy any number of products that roll back up to the General Mills umbrella, right? And that's kind of the way that our company is evolving now, where we have 3 and kind of, I would say 3.5 product lines, right? And Squigl is clearly a primary, massive product line for us with our, especially with our current trajectory. But we also have a burgeoning new category of product offering, which is the graphic facilitation offering, right? So we call that, it's like our live event business, right? Clearly, right now, everybody's kind of on pause with that, waiting to return to a little bit of the conference normalcy. But anyway, then there is that classic analog, hand-drawn whiteboard animation video production that's known as the TrueScribe brand. Besides that, with those different umbrellas and different verticals, the core team that we have, they've all got multiple email addresses, even depending on who they're responding to and what given project they're working on, So there's, speaking of multiple voices in your head, we all kind of have multiple personalities sometimes. When we're representing a certain product line, we inhabit or embody that brand, right? And so if somebody that's in our company is, we'll talk about a salesperson, and I'm actually going to put somebody on the spot here that I've been fortunate enough to work with for 5 years now. Corey Erickson is a director of business development for our company. He represents both Squigl, TrueScribe, and our emerging brands and lines of business as well. And, he's somebody that comes from a software background and has a high tech and a fast growth background. And he joined TrueScribe before Squigl had launched. And, the X factor of somebody like Corey, to answer your question of who do we surround ourselves with, what defines a great team? Something that we celebrate about Corey every week, right, is his innovation and his open-mindedness to new areas of partnership, of product use case, of account management and a customer obsession, right? It's those things that you can't necessarily teach, right? It's those things that you find in the wild. And again, it's soft skills, right? It's very difficult to imbue customer obsession in someone, right? Whether or not they care about that end user or the buyer, the way that Corey Erickson does, right? There's no way to train that in as much as to hire for that. Right. And so there's a few other qualifiers there that I would say are super important. But the bottom line, I think focusing on delighting the customer will yield revenue. And when revenue is coming in, results then can flywheel. Right. That's the big deal here. Another highlight on our team that definitely is someone that I would celebrate. And for those listening to this podcast, many of you who've worked with us know Amy May, and she's a managing producer for our company. And she also started with us 5 years ago. And not only has she demonstrated that same customer obsession, there's also a industry specialization that she brings. She's been in the video production and the media production industry for 15 years before joining our company, right? So talk about hiring a veteran who can come in and bring industry expertise to a fast growth, call it disruptive innovative industry, brand, right? That's what we are. And so that's another component, is hiring folks and finding talent that can bring value without necessarily bringing competitiveness or something, bringing, well, at so-and-so, well, in my past, we did it this way, right? It's not that. It's,
right.
I know this is going on in the industry, therefore let's bring these 2, 3, or 4 different traits and apply them to the problems we're solving here and now. So with that said, we certainly celebrate our staff, and we certainly, look for longevity. We certainly look for loyalty, but at the core, the culture fit is a je ne sais quoi, right? It's a spark, it's chemistry. It's something that when identified is also, I would say, something to hold on to, right? When you find those people, build your team around your team, right? As redundant as that sounds, but it's really true. The last point on culture, diversity is everything, right? And in our company alone, I would say we have passports from, I can think of, and I'm counting on my hands here on our webcam, right? You can see, I think 6 or 7 different countries out of our 20 some employees, right? We're a lean, mean company with, just like I said, about 24 employees or so, but 6 or 7 different nationalities off the top of my head. And that's not even looking at our actual, records or anything. So that's a key point too. So that's a very long-winded answer for you, but you've touched on a passion for me there, right? Is the team. And so thank you for that question.
I think that's so important right now. I mean, obviously, all of us are very aware of diversity. And I think sometimes we get very focused on it, and it is important, but we should be thinking about diversity in all different kinds of channels. Diversity of expression, diversity of skill set, diversity of age group, diversity of background. I always tell people the best thing that I do is hire people half my age. Now, obviously, if you're 25, that's hard to do. So clearly I'm a little older than that. But you get that different viewpoint through their eyes that I am not, I'm past that. And one of the things that my listeners will know I always say is, for everyone who's about 40 and above, all of us have lived our life half with technology and half without. So we were all a learned experience. But anybody that's under 40 really doesn't remember life without technology of some respect. Not as advanced as it is now, but pretty good for when they, really started using it. So it's a very different world in their eyes, because there wasn't a learned experience of there's a choice. It just was naturally embedded in their lifestyle. So they see things differently than I do. And I love that about having that age group and hearing, their conversations, which are totally off my radar, but valuable. And so I think, looking at embracing how you bring folks in, one of the things that I've always loved about the company, because we mirror that with our company, is relationships. We value our end users and we want them to be happy, not just from a delivery standpoint, but with working with us. We want them to want to work with us. And if they don't, that's okay. We're not going to say, oh my gosh, we're losing a sale if they're not going to stick with us. What can we do how many discounts can we offer them, kind of thing, to hang on to them? If it's not a good fit, we don't want them to have a bad experience in just solely the relationship piece. As a result, you end up with much more longevity, as you know, when you have end users who are happy with you and happy with your product.
Certainly. And to that point, and now I'll speak very tactically about a Squigl product offering that we're rolling out. This is within the Squigl umbrella. So this is very much, software as a service, right? And for those that are new to Squigl, I'll give you a quick 10-second or 20-second kind of elevator pitch. But Squigl is an online platform that enables the end user to produce media in real time through the cloud, right? Through their web browser, through a web app, whatever, using artificial intelligence to automate the workflow such that media can be produced rapidly. So I could say, oh, Sharon, let's go make a 2-minute video. And you could say to me, okay, Andrew, when will it be done? What, 3 or 4 weeks? And I could say, no, well, it'll be done today. We can have a draft this afternoon, right? That's how fast Squigl works. And so the bottom line is, speaking of the customer and customer obsession now, to go back to your point, when the customer pushes the envelope, right, and says, okay, this is great, right? And I'm thinking now of a use case just this week where the visual aesthetic may need some changing before the video is ready for prime time, ready to be broadcast, ready to be put into YouTube, whatever. So it's not, okay, well, that means we failed. It's, okay, how do we innovate? How do we respond to that customer? Find a different visual aesthetic, integrate it into what we're offering. And now I'm very pleased to report that in solving that problem, not only have we elevated a conversation with a very important end user of ours, but that very same product now can be replicated for other use cases, right? And so that's the other side to it, is customer needs tend to turn into innovation opportunity, which then turns into more productization, right? More ability to go to market.
Absolutely.
And so that's another byproduct, if you will, is literally more product.
Sure. And I know that much as we do, I know that you do this as well. When you have a repeat customer, you start to learn habitually the things that they like or the things that they don't like. And so when you get something pointed out like that on a one-off kind of project, you fix it for them and they're happy, you're happy, and you move on. But if they're a repeat consumer, then you look at, okay, this is something we need to earmark because we don't want to turn around and reproduce something else that's going to have the same conversation. We want the next conversation to be something different, or for them to come back and say, wow, we hadn't even thought of presenting it this way. And so again, going back to that relationship, when you build that with those individuals, suddenly now they're feeling like, wow, I don't have to remind you of things, or you're actually starting to see my vision without me having to verbalize it before I've even given it to you, because you're passionate and concerned about me as a user.
Oh, totally. And so that actually makes me think of a question that I'd ask back to you in your, we'll say, just generally speaking, in your perspective, right? And in all of your career with EdTech, as it's evolved, have you seen that customer centric thinking emerge more as a trend recently, or has that always been a stalwart or a identifying characteristic that makes our industry what it is? Because again, my background, 2010 was kind of when I got into this industry, right? And so for me, it's kind of been a paramount. It's been a success. It's been a key to success since day one for me, right? When we first launched TrueScribe. What about you? I know you've worked at a couple of organizations before we met and all of that. So I'm curious how you feel about that.
So it's an interesting space because I think it's had a couple different venues depending upon who has been the producer of it. So one example is we have several very large Fortune 500 companies that rolled out either with software or platforms. And because they grew so fast and so large, the consumer started to get lost in the bubble, and thus became the what people joke about, the dreaded help desk. Suddenly the vision of the end user wasn't as surmountable as mass producing what could go out to more people. And then the what I term the voter, winner takes all kind of concept came along, which is we'll survey all our end users and say, we can do these 3 things for an upgrade, and whoever gets the majority, that's the one that we'll do. So again, we weren't really considering, we did it based on usage, but we didn't do it based on really adaptability, long-term planning, really what our clients needed. We just said, how many of you would do A, B, or C? And then said, oh, well, the majority picked B, so that will be our next rollout. So we kind of lost the customer in that a little bit, in our pragmatism to be out in front and be first. The other side of it was that I'm not sure we always understood that the customer was the end user. I think when EdTech really started to take off, we recognized the end user as the person sitting at the desk in front of the screen, but the customer was the person that signed the contract and paid for it. And so that disconnect really became hard, I think, as well. Now you hear a lot of people tossing around that they're doing, white glove service, which I always find interesting because I'm thinking, if you're doing it, you shouldn't have to promote it. You shouldn't have to say, hey, come to us, we're doing white glove service. It should be automated that if I come to you, that's what I'm receiving. So that tells me that we haven't all adapted it because we've given it a name, and we're using it as a promotional piece. This is why you should come to our business and not the guy across the street, because we have white glove service and he doesn't. Well, is that really a fair trade-off if your product is inferior to his product? Because that's really, that's going to be the difference in whether or not I make money. Is maybe, a good example is, say, accounting software. If I'm relying on it to track all my income and my expenses, and yours is inferior, but you have white glove service, which means, you're answering all of my questions because your system has problems. That's not really a good trade-off. So I think, we've grown and we've struggled with it, I think, for the last really probably 10 years now, maybe even closer to 15 in some respects, where it has changed significantly and drastically, rapidly, has been due to COVID. Because suddenly our end users became everybody. And our numbers and our percentages were incredibly high. And now the CEO is having the same experience as the lowest level administrative assistant, because everybody's on the same staff call on Zoom or, another product, maybe they're on WebEx. And so they're all experiencing firsthand the same problem and all looking for the same solution kind of simultaneously. So suddenly we've had to up our game, really not by choice, but more by force. And so I think for those that weren't already in the practice of doing it, it's been painful for them. They've had to put in a lot more stock into that. For those of us that do it from the get-go, it's less impact. It's just a little more draw because there's obviously an increase in individuals and usage, but we've adapted it much easier, I think.
Right. And no, I've never even considered the fact that the end user and the customer have become melded now because of everybody's working from home remotely and all of that. I love the jokes that are going around these days about, the saying or the phrase or the motto of 2020 is, "Oh, I think you're on mute," or "Can you guys hear me yet?" Right? Yep. But what that translates to, and why that's so relevant to what you just said to me, is that ultimately software or service, even a new hardware system that's getting set up on-prem, like whatever it may be, everybody truly is the end user of that. Whether or not the CEO himself is running cable and plugging things in and, doing all of that, ultimately he still is the end user because his company is, or her, right? And so as the leadership now is truly experiencing what it's like to be at the keyboard and staring at the screen themselves in order to be on these Teams calls or whatever, the game has changed drastically. That's an emerging trend. And I think that is something that post-COVID, post-2020, as we look to the new year, as we look to the new decade, right? We're going to have to take that with us. That's something that has forever changed. So that's an amazing trend. I love that insight.
So I heard the other day, and this was a funny story, and she did say I could share it. So I talked with someone who is an executive assistant. So, works directly for the CEO. And she said, people joke that I'm the watchdog. No one gets in to see him unless I let them through. Nobody, gets to phone call him. I screen his emails. He's very isolated. And she said, what became very funny was when everyone had to be at home, his wife had no interest in being his executive assistant, naturally, because everybody's home and she's taking care of the kids and the kids are trying to go to school online. And so she said, he suddenly realized just how many times a day that he would get bothered, where in the past he was getting work done and he was isolated. And so she said, the good news of COVID is there's a newfound appreciation for the work that I do and the service that I bring. She said, which included a raise and a very nice gift. She said, but the other thing that it did that was even better was he said, oh my gosh, this is what everybody goes through except me, because everyone else is more towards the, even physically the front of the building when people walk in. And she said, so what it's caused him to do now is he's actually relooking at the floor plan layout. He's thinking of adding in some isolation areas so that people can have some quiet space to work. And it's just really redefined for him what everyone else goes through every day. And so she said, I was thrilled because she said, I have said to him over time, the lobby, there's not carpet, so it's so loud. It echoes. When people walk in, it's disturbing. And she said for him, it was all about the look. When they walk in visually, it's great. And she said, and now he's realizing, my gosh, how can people work? Because he's on a call and his kids are running around behind him and his wife's trying to get them out of the way. And so, it's funny. And you hear a lot of stories like that. COVID brought us back to reality, I think, in a lot of different ways. And people are starting to recognize that they have to do things differently, that no matter where you're at in the company, now suddenly you've seen how everybody works and what they have to go through to make things happen every day. I have a good colleague who always says, make the magic happen. You've got all these people making magic every day and you don't realize what they go through to do it. But also you have to now figure out, how do you really stimulate the people that you're talking to constantly? Because you're on Zoom 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, or some other system, or you're on emails all day long, or doing, Microsoft Teams for group work. And so, for me, something like Squigl comes back around to that. And so I'd be curious to hear from you, how you all have adapted during COVID, but then also how your product fits in for everybody who's still staying home, or unfortunately may now be heading back home because we're starting to see the numbers go back up nationwide.
Right. I would say the most compelling fact in response to that question would be, just suffice to say, we feel blessed at Squigl as well as TrueScribe, right? But we feel blessed because our company continues to grow. And that right there sets us aside from so many businesses, families, small companies, large companies, the hospitality industry at large. I mean, there's just so much. And so that's it, is our growth rate has actually spiked a little bit in the past 9 months or so since the pandemic was declared. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we're a virtual communications platform that has zero reliance on premises, right? Like we clearly produce things in our studio, and we can always continue to do so. It's a very secure studio. We don't have guests coming in, to your point about interruptions, right? It's not like there's clients coming in to visit or anything. That'll happen for business reasons, but not for production reasons. So my point is, even from a software perspective with Squigl, our development team has always been remote, right? And so our business practices haven't really changed aside from certain, just call it day-to-day protocol in our production facility, right? Our studio, people are wearing masks, of course. There's social distancing. So there's less density in the office or in the studio here. So instead of 5 people in the cubicle space out there, there may be 3, right? And more spaced out, right? So anyways, with that said, the reason for the spike, and it's drastic, is actually that UNESCO themselves identified Squigl, specifically our software as a service, to be a key differentiator and or solution to the work from home pivot. And what that translates to is maybe UNESCO saw it coming, that we might get sick of our 12-hour Zoom days, right? Who knows? But the core value proposition of Squigl is that folks can quickly and rapidly produce video content that doesn't feature their faces. They don't need to turn on their webcam. They don't need to put on their makeup, right? They can simply open up the Squigl application, make a quick video and share a thought, a 2-minute video, a 1-minute video. Even we share 20-second videos internally, just a quick little Squigl, just to share a quick idea to somebody without writing an email, without calling a conference call, and God forbid, without another 3-hour Zoom session or whatever, right? With the whole team, all hands. And so that's the big difference, is that it's micro learning, right? It's nano learning, truly, as we're sharing these little just-in-time modules, right? Like a 20-second video or a 1-minute video even about the new HR policy is one that's currently rolling out internally at our company, right? There's a new policy as benefits are changing a little bit for re-enrollment. And so our HR lead has decided, well, of course I'm going to make a Squigl video about this, because that's a general value proposition of what we do. But what that results in then, no phone call necessary, no complicated email, no conference, no Zoom time, right? It's just, here's a 1-minute video about the new re-enrollments. Done. Now that video can live in perpetuity. It's evergreen. It's stuck on screen, or it's in the SharePoint, right? And so I can always revert back to it. That also becomes a really interesting use case with our end users. They see that on our website, or we talk about it in our email blast or whatever. And then suddenly the network effect picks up, right? And then an HR director halfway across the world that reads our emails says, well, Squiggl's HR team is doing this. Now we're going to do this internally over here. And before you know it, there's a $5 billion retail company in the Philippines that is adopting that at the enterprise level, right? I mean, and that's a real story. And so as these things happen, what we start to see is an adoption of less synchronous communication, right? You and I would challenge us. We could probably exchange Squigl videos for the next 2 weeks, just little 30-second spots, a 20-second video. We could probably achieve just as much or more than a 1 hour or a half an hour real-time conference call. You know what I mean? That's the big difference that we're starting to see, is this whole sick of Zoom. And it's not Zoom as a product or as a platform, right? That's a great tool. We're using it right now. The bottom line, though, is the human brain and the sensitivities that we have is just creature comforts in the way that we are. I don't think we really like to be on camera for 10 hours. Truly. And then you multiply that by 5 days. And from Monday morning when I'm dapper and ready to go to Friday afternoon when I'm shutting it down for the weekend, wow, that was a lot of screen time. You know? So that's, again, to answer your question in short, how are we faring? How are we doing? We've seen a tremendous uptick in adoption. We've doubled or more our subscription count. We're now in 180 countries. There's hundreds of thousands of users worldwide on the Squigl platform. And again, month over month, we continue to grow in revenues, so that we know we are very humbled by that. Many companies are closing down. Many companies are simply shutting their doors and saying goodbye. They're filing their dissolution notices. They're over, right? So with that said, we're nothing but grateful and humble about this. We for sure continue to give back. I will say that too, as this is a long-winded answer, so I'll go one step further on it. The best thing we've done in the past 3 months has been our free school pilot project or program. Meaning, if you're a school, and this is for any of your listeners right now too, any school that hasn't used Squigl yet that's interested can jump onto our platform through the rest of the calendar year, or the academic year, I should say, up until June of 2021, and have Squigl for as many teachers, as many students, as many administrators as they like, totally no charge, free of cost, and in a way to at least do our part. We provide the customer service, we do the maintenance, we do all the pro services that are involved in the rollout and the implementation. You know, you get assigned an account manager, but we're donating that, right?
Sure.
For the 8 to 9 months that are left in the calendar, in the school year. And we're doing that because we know this fatigue is real. We know that teachers who are teaching have never been, they didn't sign up to be remote virtual instructors.
No.
They signed up to teach in the classroom. So that right there is just one example of why we, as an educational technology platform, are finding it's like our charge now, right? We're able to grow our business, so we're going to do that. But simultaneously, and just as important, I like to say, for every $100 we make as a company, we're going to spend 20 of that back into the market, back into the area of most need, as they say. And so that's happening on a weekly basis. We're kicking off, new relationships that are totally gratis. And I will say that there's no greater fulfillment for our brand than that exact formula.
That is so fantastic. And that's something that no matter how small your company is, there's always those things out there. There's always someone in need. And it's so great when you can, give back and you can be a part of it. But particularly during the pandemic, it wasn't like anyone had time to plan. This thing came, and not only were people forced into uncomfortable areas that they weren't used to, there was no one behind them to even say, well, here's some resources, or, we'll help you get started. It's been a difficult lot for all of them. And so it's so exciting to hear that you're doing that. when you talk about the fact that, teachers are struggling with this, the students are struggling too, because students struggle to sit still for long periods of time. And when you're just doing live Zoom session, staring at everyone else in, there's not really any visual stimulation. It's very, very difficult. I loved your HR example because I always think of HR inundates us, every job I've ever been at, inundates us with emails because they never want to be accused of not getting the information out. The problem is I always get the information when I don't need it. It's the start of the new enrollment year and, they tell me how much money I have to spend and how many times I can go, get my teeth cleaned or whatever. And then I forget about it. And then, 8 months later, I get sick or something happens and I'm like, oh, I don't even know if that's covered or what I had to do for that. And then I'm digging through all these emails that I threw into a folder, trying to figure out, usually to find out, oh, well, if you need more information, click here, which results in going to the main website that is, again, a whole nother search. Or even worse, you have to call and ask the question. So to be able to shoot something out and say, okay, here's the changes for this year. And here's the 3 things you'd need to do. And the fact that I would know I could just go back to that when I'm ready would be so much better, so much more efficient on both sides, both for the person sending it out to say, done with that one, off my list, instead of, oh, I've got to, resend this email out 6 times so I can prove that, I got the information out. So I loved that example. I love the idea of you all being in the classrooms and, in the virtual classrooms. Talk a little bit about, do you have schools that are using it even on site? So before COVID, higher ed that's using it in their classrooms, even when students are coming to physically be there?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, yeah, I'll say this. As I was a self-admitted art historian, right? I was a teacher's assistant and finishing my graduate degree, and I maintained really good relationships, just with my faculty, right? And so when TrueScribe decided to roll out Squigl, it was a beta product that didn't even have a name. We just called it the whiteboard animation software. And that software at the time, it didn't have a specific kind of vertical that it fit into. So we were kind of saying, what would be some use cases? How can this work, right? What is it really meant to solve? How do we apply it? Where is our end user? So I called one of my former professors, who's the academic dean now or the associate dean of the University of St. Thomas. His name's Dr. Mark Stansbury O'Donnell, and he's a PhD from Yale University in Greek art and archaeology, right? And he was basically the chair of my committee, and I defended my thesis with him. So, I basically said to him, "Hey, Mark, we've got this interesting software. What can we do with it?" Right? And at that stage, Dr. Stansbury O'Donnell saw in this product something that now is being seen worldwide. But the bottom line is, he had taught the same curriculum about Greek art for, 15 years or something. And I took that class. And he assigned the same, kind of very similar paperwork. And, you've got to write this précis or this abstract and study these authors and all of these things, right? To understand the curriculum, to demonstrate, knowledge, mastery, and all of these things. But what became very interesting is he applied and this was a very early on, a use case example. He applied Squigl as the delivery mechanism for the students. So the students then had to actually write their papers, as it were, in Squigl. And so by giving a video production assignment to graduate art historians, it's changing the entire thinking process from I'm here to compose and write to I have to visualize my story to demonstrate understanding. So it changes the thinking from linear, classic academic word processing, right? I'm sitting here pretending I'm writing at my keyboard because that's what, we're trained to do in academia. So Mark, again, said, okay, guys, for this module, for this assignment, I want you to make a Squigl video. And student engagement went up. Positive feedback on that assignment was through the roof. The Squigl videos still to this day remain in our archive as some of our coolest ones, because that was like the early stage, the beta testing, the rollout, right? It had never existed before then. And so why that's so relevant, why it's so interesting to us is because those students then became like directors as opposed to writers. And they were able to stand up in front of their class and share their video of 2 minutes long. And that's a whole different experience than presenting your abstract, right? And you've been through so many academic conferences, that kind of just grind needed a little bit of fresh treatment, if you will, So that's how we achieved that. And now it's rampant in schools. Before COVID, it was kind of burgeoning. There was interest generating, but now again, the numbers are just through the roof. It's in schools in so many countries, and very soon you'll see on the Microsoft for Education blog a nice spotlight or showcase about us, because it truly is something that students and teachers and faculty and administrators are starting to say, there's something here.
We have become a visual society, which is ironic because, as a historian, that's how we started out. Somewhere along the line, we decided the written word became important, and we went a little overboard. We shifted into full written word with no visuals. And then we backed out of that a little bit and started to reintroduce visuals. Now we're back to visual, but with an AI component, because now we want to be part of the creative process. So we want to create our TikTok video, and we want to have our Facebook Live and do all of these things. But again, as part of a learning mechanism. So I think, Squigl is in the right place at the right time, obviously, through a lot of hard work and a lot of thought and visualization of it. But it's fascinating to think about how you're training the next generation of learners to think and analyze things in new and different ways than even the group just before them. So I have a last question for you, which is, what's your technology prediction for the future?
Great question. I love that one. That makes me think. So in fact, I'll jump off like a diving board of the point you just made, because one of my favorite statistics is that Forbes, and I can't remember if it was McKinsey, PwC, and some other leading Big Four analyst firm, has stated, and they all agree, that the next 1 billion users of high technology will not be trained as typists. They won't use keyboards. That means that this whole notion of being word processors or clerks, or however you want to think about it, that we are, just type, and screen, that's going away. So it's all about voice and act. And I've got my phone in my hand now and my mobile device, because it's all about looking at the screen like this, talking into it, using voice command. Very soon, I think the QWERTY keyboard itself, well, maybe not very soon, but the next billion users, right? That could be Africa. That could be within the Indian subcontinent. That could be LATAM, APAC, right? But the next billion are not going to have this traditional upbringing that we grew up with. And I'm a child of the 80s, right? So I did learn like just traditional word processing as a skill. How many words per minute can you type? That's going to get you into college.
Yep.
That won't be a thing. It's going to be, what can I do with my voice? What can I film? What can I produce? What can I create to share a story or an idea? But this whole concept of sitting here typing, using my mouse and keyboard, that's going to really not be a thing, I believe. So to answer your question in short, the trend that I see happening more and more, especially in the developing countries, in the emerging markets, is just straight to mobile first. That's it. Voice and video.
Will be something. And I will be sad because I type very quickly. I honed my skill early on and I've managed to maintain it. So this has been a wonderful conversation today. And obviously we could go on and on about this. We may have to do a part 2 down the road, because it's always fascinating to just look at how people are learning and what's impacting the next level of their lives. So any last bits of information on Squigl and your website?
Oh, yeah. So the website is Squiglit, and that's spelled SQUIGLIT.com, or just simply Bing it, right? Go into Bing and type Squigl, SQUIGL, and you'll find us through the Microsoft Azure Marketplace. You can also actually, if you're looking for more information, find us on Twitter as well. So we're very accessible. But as far as a closing note share, I think now's as good a time as any for me to tell your listeners that they can learn more about Squigl through your team as well.
Absolutely. We're very excited to be partnering with Squigl and the whole TrueScribe family. After working with them for a number of years, we're going to be working alongside them. So you can always reach out to us as well. I want to thank everyone for listening today. This has been an exciting conversation, and thank Andrew for joining us. As always, you can always find more information on us on www.downingedtech.com. And we welcome you to listen to our other podcasts. You can stream us on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. We also are available on YouTube streaming as well. So thanks again for everyone to joining us. And until next time, keep learning.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.